Welcome to Strategy Next by J. Helmy and Company, the premier podcast for business leaders and professionals. On Strategy Next, we delve into the latest tactics and strategies driving the future of business through interviews with top industry experts and thought leaders. From growing startups to leading large enterprises, this podcast is a must-listen for executives, managers, and aspiring business leaders. Tune in to stay ahead of the game and elevate your strategic planning.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the latest episode of Strategy Next by J. Helmy and Company. My name is Jon Lobb, and I'm your host for today. Today's topic is a fascinating one: harnessing conflict for strategic innovation and a healthier workplace. My guest, Dr. Clare Fowler, is an author of Rising Above Office Conflict, a lighthearted guide for the heavy-hearted employee, published in 2023. Her work focuses on practical and accessible conflict resolution strategies in workplace settings. Clare, welcome to the program. We're delighted to have you with us.
Thank you so much, John. Delighted to be here.
Wonderful. So, Clare, when we talk about conflict in the workplace, for some it may be a taboo subject, but the reality, from what I understand, taking a look at your materials, the reality is that conflict exists in every workplace to some extent. Can you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the people who say that they don't have conflict either are just in denial or they're completely out of touch with their employees. So absolutely, we see conflict in every area of the workplace, and I think that that's a good thing. On the one hand, if we disagree with someone, then it forces us to articulate and clarify our beliefs. But the other option there is I might be willing to broaden my beliefs, right? I can see where you're coming from. I might shift my position. And what we're left with is a much stronger viewpoint, and it increases the diversity of thought in an office. So it makes me very nervous when people say, oh, we don't disagree, because you know that people have different opinions and values that they're bringing into the workplace. So it's telling me either that you hired clones of your employee because you wanted everyone that probably just agrees with you, or it's telling me that people don't feel comfortable speaking up. And in the short term, that might feel harmonious, but very quickly that starts to lead to resentment, to bitterness, to burnout. We see increased turnover. And then long term, what we start to see is that product quality goes down, right? If people aren't willing to speak up about concerns that they have or process improvement, things like that, then over time, the company just starts to feel stale. So absolutely, conflict lives in every single workplace. And I'd say it's a dark horse, right? It's the beautiful benefit of being in the workplace is
Absolutely.
that a lot of people just don't appreciate how helpful it can be for the company as a whole. Let me be a little cheesy here for just a minute and say, I think one thing that our society has forgotten is how necessary conflict is for us personally, for our own growth. If you read any fitness magazines right now, the hottest topic are these myokines. And myokines are known as the hope molecule. And it's interesting because they only are created in our body in very specific circumstances. So picture you've been going to the gym every morning and you've been trying to curl this 30-pound weight and you just can't. But you start really trying and you're maxing out your reps and you're eating healthy and you're getting better sleep. And then one day you show up and you can lift this 30-pound weight. That's when your body produces these myokines because you went through something difficult that initially you didn't think that you could do. But by going through this difficult experience, your body now has hope in you. It says, you know what? I'm going to bet on John. He's a sure thing. I know that even if circumstances are difficult, that he's going to push through, he's going to get better, and he can do hard things. And that's, again, I told you it was going to be a little cheesy, but this is really the root of our mental health, is having confidence in ourselves and knowing that even if things are hard, that we're going to do what we need to succeed at it. And unfortunately, I think that our office culture has become such that people don't want to talk about the hard things, right? There's a sense of shame or that I've made a mistake if I disagree with you. And so because of that, we're not tackling a lot of the hard things that are necessary for us to feel that sense of confidence and integration and pride in ourselves that only come from working through those difficult conversations, right? Having a disagreement with somebody else, but I'm brave and I talk about it with you, and we might disagree at first, but then we come to a collaborative solution. And that's when those myokines are produced. That's when we start to have hope and maybe even, dare I say it, look forward to coming to the office on Monday because we know that it's going to be okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think there's probably, there may be a sense on the part of a lot of folks that, especially when you look at startups or people just getting their first rounds of funding, and they like to crow about the fact that we are all of one mindset. We are ABC company. That's terrific. But if everybody, it reminds me actually of a couple of years ago at one of the companies I've been with, we took the DISC assessment, which is a personality assessment. And it turned out we had, I think, 29 Ds in the room. And I was the lone S. And I thought, oh boy, maybe I'm in the wrong place. And yet the instructor pointed out, you know what, John? Thank goodness they have an S. They need you. They need someone to be different. And they need someone, quite frankly, to butt against, because if you have an entire company full of Ds, or you have everyone who says, oh, we all agree all the time, we never disagree about anything, that's not right. So it's a fascinating angle that you're sharing, where not only should we admit or acknowledge that conflict exists, but we should leverage it and become stronger through it.
Absolutely. And I think you've just hit on a really important point that I do feel is management's responsibility. When we start to create our management team, my instinct would be to surround myself with like-minded people, right? People that are going to see where I'm coming from. We have the same vision. We have the same approach to things because I know that we can work very easily together. But then the truth is, why are we bothering to pay the other person if they're just a clone of me, right? People are essentially getting one employee for the price of two. So Instead, I agree with you. Taking things like the DISC assessment or Strengths Finder or any of those tools where we can start to figure out, do we have a diverse workforce? Meaning, do we have someone who's the engineer, someone who's the creative, someone who is going to focus on being collaborative, someone who is willing to say the unpopular opinion just because they know it's the right thing to do, right? That's really what we're looking for to create a strong office.
Absolutely. And what advice can you give to a leader who recognizes perhaps that they, in themselves, they don't have the best conflict resolution? Maybe they've made their name by being a star player, like a solo act. And now they've got to the point in their management career where they're responsible for others, and perhaps they have to interact with a board of directors, and they don't know where to start as a leader. What can they do?
Yeah, great question. So this is something that I talk about a lot in my book because it's very common. If I'm going to distill two types of personalities, it would be thunder personality and the turtle personality. So you have the thunderer who is used to coming into a conversation and just saying, this is the way it is. You need to have that report on my desk Monday morning at 9. And then they walk away before there's any kind of a conversation. And then you also have the turtle approach. And the turtle is someone who just says, oh yeah, whenever you could have that on my desk, that would be great. I know you're busy this weekend, so I don't want you to feel stressed about it. And that's the nice style, right? The turtle style of leadership. One focuses more on the end result or the deliverable, right? The thunder makes sure that we are meeting project deadlines, whereas the turtle focuses more on the relational style. And they place more emphasis on, are we harmonious? Are we getting along? And not so much on the product. The problem here is that both of those strategies are dreadfully incomplete, and they're both very short-sighted. And this is interesting because a lot of turtlers think that they're doing the right thing by being so nice, that they're valuing another person by being harmonious, by being flexible, by being patient. But this is such a short-term strategy because very quickly we see that product starts to deteriorate, that people don't feel that sense of trust. They don't feel that sense of leadership. And interestingly, they don't even feel like they know their manager. Because if a manager isn't willing to push back.
Killing their people with kindness. Killing their people with kindness. Yep.
Right. I was working with an office a few years ago, and they had a very nice manager. And we're seeing this happen pretty frequently when there are not enough staff choices to hire the qualified manager. So instead, they just hire from the friend pool. And so that person is promoted, not because they're a great manager, just because they got along with everyone. So in this office, that's exactly what happened. And there was a perk where two people from the office were going to get to go to a conference in Hawaii. the manager didn't want to say to the rest of the office who was going to go to the conference because he didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. So for the entire year, the office was competitive and they were working against each other and they were trying to get their ideas in front of him. And it was a very stressful year. At the end of the year, 2 weeks before the conference, he finally announces the 2 people that he chose to go. And these were people with busy lives, with kids, and it's impossible to try to go to Hawaii like that at the last minute, right? And to figure out daycare and all of that. So unfortunately, nobody got to go to the conference. And what's interesting is that whole year, he thought that he was being nice. He thought that he was doing the right thing because he was making it such a harmonious office where nobody's feelings were hurt. But at the end, he dreadfully missed the goal because he wasn't willing to sit down and have the tough conversation. And to be honest, I think the same thing is true for Thunderers. I think Thunderers also are not willing to sit down and have the difficult conversation. And that might come from a place of insecurity where they don't have the skills. It might also come from a place of impatience where they're really busy and they don't want to take the time to hear the other person's input. But as I mentioned, both of these are very short-term strategies because if I feel like I can't trust my leader, I'm not going to be very invested in that office. But the opposite is true. If I'm working for a Thunderer, if I feel like my leader doesn't trust me, then I'm not going to have a long-term strategy to stay at that office, right? I'll want to move on to somewhere else. Yeah.
Exactly.
So the short answer to your...
Go ahead. It all trickles down from the top.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what do we do when we see managers with one of those personalities, with the Thunder personality or the Turtle personality? I mean, the first thing that you want to do, of course, is to get them the proper training to be able to do 2 things, to be able to articulate their interests and to be able to hear another person's interests. And for me, coaching, leadership training, good negotiation skills, it really comes down to those 2 things. Can I explain to you exactly what my interests are? And can I also take the time to listen to your interests and hold both of those as equally important?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. It's just fascinating because it's all around us. I mean, and I'm certain it's in every company, no matter how dancing with joy people seem to be and how many LinkedIn posts that say, we have the best culture ever. And just look at us, here we are at the picnic, here we are at the amusement park together. There's going to be conflict. And quite frankly, if you're a leader listening today and you believe that your organization has no conflict, you could really be in trouble.
That's so true. The Ombuds Association, right? So an ombud is usually the first line of defense in a company that hears about any existing conflicts. Well, post-COVID, the Ombuds Association reported that relational conflicts had gone up by 72%. And at first, managers said, well, this is horrible. Where did all these conflicts come from? I thought that we were doing okay, but now suddenly these conflicts are just creeping out of the woodwork. And the ombuds had to say, no. Those conflicts have always been there. But COVID gave people enough perspective that when they came back, they said, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I don't want to come back to the office and sit in that office full of microaggressions and the power imbalance and the shaming. I'm done. So the ombuds said, this is actually incredibly healthy because look, yes, those relationship conflicts, that there was an increase in the report of those relationship conflicts by 72%, but there was an equally corresponding satisfaction jump. People said, now that we're finally talking about this, I'm so much happier. I am so much more invested in my office because the conflict has always been there. I just didn't feel like I could do anything about it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And it makes you think with the debate among some leaders about, forcing people back to the office versus adopting a remote workplace atmosphere, which really COVID and the pandemic kind of forced on all of us for a while. You wonder with those that insist, I even read about a company building a brand new headquarters and insisting that everyone either move into the new building, which they're spending X millions of dollars on, or you can find someplace else to work. And you wonder what's driving that. Is it the fact that they don't trust people to work remotely, or have they sensed maybe increased conflict that they don't want to deal with? And it seems like, when we all worked here and we all could just stare down at our desks and stay in our cubes, things seem to work better. It makes you wonder. It makes you wonder.
Right. Well, what I have seen from the conflict resolution side is that, unfortunately, absence does not make the heart grow fonder. That instead, absence breeds jealousy, absence breeds insecurity, and absence breeds a sense that if something happens outside of the expected norm, it's because you don't like me or you think that I have done something wrong. Whereas if we're seeing each other in the office every day and we have so much background and history and context, and I know what's going on in your world, if you're a little snappy with me one day, then we have enough of a buffer where we can handle that. But if we don't see each other and we're only corresponding via email, and that email feels a little short, then I'm going to assume you don't like me or you're just a jerk. And I'll come up with all these assumptions in my head. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to go back to the office, right? I work from home most of the time and it's heavenly. But we absolutely need to come up with some kind of a hybrid approach so that we can have that context, so that we can have that relationship building, just to understand where the other person is coming from. In our office, we just hired a team, tech developers over in India. And the first thing that we did was all of the management team flew out there and spent the week with them. We got to know their kids. We went on walks. We went to a park together. And so now whenever we send notes, if it's urgent or, oh, what are we going to do about this? Help. Then we have enough context and history in our relationship that we know the other person isn't being pushy, or they don't think that I've messed up somehow, or I don't think that they have failed. Instead, I know enough about that person that I can accept that request without all of the added junk on top of it. Or if I am feeling something like that, then I can reach out to the person and say, hey, why are you being snappy with me? What's going on?
Exactly. And rather than ending up with hurt feelings, perhaps you have the ability to engage and leverage potential conflicts, which will be inevitable, leverage those conflicts to move the company forward rather than getting mired in hurt feelings.
Exactly. And I think this is where it takes a successful manager, somebody who's very confident in themselves. When they feel that pressure coming at them, they can either, they can strengthen and say, no, you can't talk to me like that, or we won't tolerate that kind of tardiness or communication in this office, right? They can be really tough like a turtle, or they can just bend over and pretend like they're not seeing anything. I'm sorry, like a thunder, and then like a turtle would just pretend like they're not seeing anything. What I think a really good manager does is they take that energy and they kind of aikido with it. They can take it and turn alongside that person's energy and say, oh, I can tell you're so passionate about this project, and I really appreciate that. Let me come alongside you and let's work together to make this process even better. Because you don't want to diminish somebody's feelings or passion, right? We don't want to discourage them from speaking up, but I don't want to hand them the keys to the kingdom either. It takes someone with experience, someone who is self-confident enough to be able to say, I'm not going to take this personally, and I'm not going to think that there's something wrong with you. Instead, I'm willing to acknowledge maybe the process could be improved, and we can work together to figure out how to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And just one last question. I know we're almost running out of time, but it's just so fascinating talking to you. Talk about just a little bit about gender. When you talk about turtles and thunderers, do men and women behave differently, obviously, but when it comes to conflict resolution, does gender help us or even hurt us at times in terms of the way we approach it?
Yeah, great question. So when we're talking about gender, what I'm looking at more is, what type of a household did someone grow up in? Did they grow up in a household that is stereotypically very masculine and they had these masculine expectations on them? Or was it a very feminine household and they had feminine expectations on them? Because that's really what breeds our behaviors and our approach to conflict. There was a fascinating study done about a decade ago by the National Institutes of Health. And they sat all these elementary age children down to do a puzzle. And they divided them into boys and girls, those who identified as boys, those who identified as girls. But more than that, those who had grown up in a rough and tumble masculine household or a sweet, quiet, feminine household. And they watched how they did this puzzle. So interestingly, the boys, right, who had the masculine expectations, they jumped in and they were loving it. And they had no strategy, but they were just picking up pieces and putting them here and having so much fun, right? And the girls, first they did what I had always thought everyone did with a puzzle. First, you do all of the edge pieces, then you arrange them by faces, then you arrange them by colors. And once you have all of your little piles set up, then you start working on the different pieces of the puzzle. So they had a strategy beforehand. And interestingly, the girls finished first, but they also didn't have as much fun as the boys did, right? So there were two different approaches to the process there. And this goes back to a lot of boys were raised with the expectation that you should be brave. Even if you don't feel confident or you don't have the answers, you've got to fake it and pretend like you do. And so you jump into any conflict, assuming that you're right and making sure that the other person knows that you're right. And then you have girls who were taught to be perfect, and they shouldn't present themselves until they are absolutely perfect. And we see this with resumes, for instance. If a man applies for a job, they'll apply if they think that they meet about 60 to 70% of the qualifications, whereas most women will not apply for a job until they meet 100% of the qualifications, right? I have to be perfect.
Wow.
But there's another interesting element to this jigsaw puzzle. And the idea of this, to be honest, just makes me so angry that they did this to these poor little kids. They had pulled the final piece of the puzzle. So these kids had been working and they thought they were done with the puzzle. But then just when they thought they were about to finish, they realized that final piece is missing. So the boys said, hey, you didn't give me all the pieces to the puzzle. I need that final piece. And the girls said, oh, I must have dropped it. Or maybe I put the puzzle together wrong. Or I'm sorry, I must have messed up somehow. So in other words, when faced with a problem, we have one group of people that's looking externally to look at the world around them and see what could be improved with the process. And we have another group that's willing to look internally and see how they can respond to the conflict differently or how they can be better prepared next time. And what's fascinating about this is that just like a puzzle, neither piece is complete, because the answer to a conflict is usually, yeah, it's a little bit of work that you need to do internally. And it's also, there's probably some stuff externally, right? There's probably a systemic issue that we could improve upon. And if they don't learn how to live in harmony with each other, it can result in this really nasty relationship where one is always looking externally and the other one is always willing to look internally and hold the blame. And then one person is continuing to improve upon themselves, but we're not really looking at the process. We're not really looking big picture. So the more people can understand that I was shaped to be brave or I was shaped to be perfect, and that's great, but that's not the whole picture. I need to be able to look within myself, but I also need to be able to look externally, or I need to be able to value someone who was raised with that set of skills. That's when you've got this really strong workforce, right? Because you have some people who are great at looking internally. You have some people who are great at looking externally, but that's only half of the puzzle. You need those two people to be able to fit together and say, okay, I'm willing to have this difficult conversation with you. I'm willing to tell you what I'm upset about. And I'm willing to hear what you're upset about, because I know that's what's going to make us stronger as a workforce.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Claire, I so wish we had more time to chat. It's just fascinating material. It really is. And I thank you so much, Dr. Clare Fowler. And again, the name of the book is Rising Above Office Conflict, a lighthearted guide for the heavy-hearted employee, available, I'm sure, on Amazon and everywhere that you look for books. And thank you so much for being with us today. It was an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, John. Great to be here.
That's it for this episode of Strategy Next. We hope you enjoyed our conversation and felt informed and enlightened about the topic discussed. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. You can find us on all major podcast platforms, and if you have any comments or suggestions for future episodes, please reach out to us at strategynext@jhelmy.co. Week with another expert guest, ready to share their insights and expertise with you. Until next time, thank you for listening to Strategy Next by J. Helmy & Company. Strategy reinvented.